welcome back. This is our last week of content, and basically this is the week where we are going to start looking into the future. I'm hoping you won't hear too much from me this week, but as you know, I can talk and talk and talk. So let's hope that I keep it pretty tight. I've got a pretty tight slide deck to work through with you. The bulk of what I want you to do this week is go to the South by Southwest website or to Future Today Institute's website and find the latest version of Amy Webb's Future Today report. So Amy Webb is a very well-known, very highly respected quantitative futurist. And every year she gives a smashing presentation looking at a range of different technologies that are emerging, what she thinks is happening. And one of the things I really like about the work she does is she tends to take multiple technologies and future plans and basically pulls them together and runs through scenarios, both best case and, well, I'd like to say worst case, but the language she uses, not inappropriately sometimes, is catastrophic. And this is a really great way for us to think about the kind of issues that we're dealing with. So let's actually just continue on. What I want to talk to you today about is some of the key terminology that future thinkers and foresight specialists use. So I want to focus particularly on artificial intelligence and blockchain, obviously, but I want to make sure that you understand the way that academics and that others that you're going to come across in the videos and the readings that you have for this week talk about these terms. So when we're talking about the future or futures, what are we talking about? Now, clearly we're talking about a time in the future, but when we're talking about in this context, we're really talking about a range of possible outcomes, scenarios, or events that might occur in the future. We recognize that we actually cannot predict the future, as Webb says. In fact, the maths just doesn't work out. And as I regularly say, there's one thing I know for sure about the future, or two things actually. One is it's different from today. Secondly, it will be different from any actual prediction that you make. It is impossible to predict it. So possible futures are influenced by a range of different factors. They include, but they're not only, technological advancements. There's also social and cultural shifts. Think about the way we think about the world differently from how our parents did, or even how we did 10 years ago. There's so much that we've learned, and that happens slowly. We don't always notice it. In the context of AI and blockchain, understanding possible futures can help us anticipate potential legal, ethical, and regulatory challenges that are likely to arise as those technologies evolve. Okay. Sorry, I was trying to think what else I wanted to say there, but I think I've covered it all off. Next, I want to make sure we're using the word foresight in the same way. So when futurists talk about foresight, they're talking about a systematic exploration and analysis of possible futures. So foresight involves identifying and assessing potential opportunities, risks, and uncertainties to make informed decisions about strategies, policies, and of course, regulation. Foresight allows businesses, governments, and regulators to proactively address emerging legal considerations and minimize potential harm while fostering innovation. Foresight is a strategic planning tool. Now, I keep coming back to regulation and legal considerations because that's what this particular course is about. But foresight is a skill and a strategic tool that is regularly used in organizations as they navigate strategic planning, looking for what the future will bring. So let me give you an example of the use of these terms and these skills by actually looking historically. Let's think about the commercial, the retail internet, which really in the early 90s the internet was effectively only used by scientists. There were predictions out there that it would never amount to anything very much. And yet by the end of that decade, we saw the first ever dot-com boom. I always like to bring in a pop culture reference where I can. At the moment on Spotify, there's a lovely little program called $1 Billion Code, which is about essentially the invention and an IP dispute relating to Google Earth. It's in German. But it's actually really fascinating to really put myself back to what it was like in the 90s and to think about what our expectations were of computers and of the internet. Another similar show, which is mostly in Swedish, is called The Playlist. It's about Spotify and the emergence of Spotify. It's set a little bit later, but similarly, it's a great reminder of how these things change. And if you're like a courtroom M&A style drama, you might find them really interesting, particularly if you enjoyed this subject. So getting back to what my plan was, rather than talking about television, when we think about the commercial, the retail internet, as it gained traction, various futures and scenarios could have been envisaged at that time. The scenarios might have included widespread e-commerce adoption, the emergence of social media, and the rise of remote work. The firms that actually envisaged those futures or regulators that applied that kind of foresight to these potential futures would have been better positioned to adapt their strategies and policies to address the legal and regulatory implications of these developments, rather than having to respond to these developments as they arose. Another important concept that we need to be aware of is this idea of futures literacy. Future literacy refers to the ability to understand, navigate, and make sense of the complex and uncertain future. This language that business students in particular will have heard is the VUCA world, the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world. So future literacy is about finding the skills and knowledge needed to identify and analyze trends, signals, and scenarios, and apply what you learn, apply the data you collect to decision-making processes. Developing future literacy is crucial for anticipating the legal, ethical, and regulatory challenges that are likely to arise from the development and adoption of AI and blockchain technologies. Developing future literacy in the context of, when we think about the development of the commercial or retail internet, that would have involved understanding the potential impact of the internet on communication, business, and society as a whole. It would have required staying informed about technological advances, monitoring emerging trends, and engaging in discussions about the ethical, legal, and regulatory challenges posed by the internet. Organisations and regulators with a high level of future literacy back then would have been better equipped to anticipate and address the implications of the internet for data privacy, intellectual property, and a range of other considerations, again, rather than reacting in real time. To me, it is always really interesting to think about the ways that people use social media early on without necessarily thinking about what the impact would be of sharing so much information on their personal safety. The ways that hackers use that information wasn't necessarily something that anybody was really thinking about early on in the process. So, how do we do foresight process? How do we do foresight? What are the processes and methodologies? Tarot cards? No, I'm only kidding. This slide comes from Amy Webb's 2023 presentation. And essentially, we're talking about a methodology that looks at signals and trends, identifies what's influencing the future. They're then identifying macro scenarios, so looking at what potential futures might look like. And then ultimately their methodology is about identifying the strategic scenarios. So looking at particular organizations, industries, enterprises, or even you, and thinking strategically what is it that you need to do to be most likely to end up with the future that you want. Webb uses this 7-step forecasting funnel. There are plenty of other methodologies that are available and open source. In addition to Amy Webb's material, I just recommend her video because I think it'll give us so much to talk about in class. But all of the big four accounting firms, plus Gartner, plus a range of other future forecasting or foresight firms, all provide a range of reports, and it can be a lot of fun actually looking at the different futures they envisage. From Webb's 2023 report, the material, and again, it's all open source and all available to you should you choose to do the deep dive. She comes up with 666 trends. That's a huge amount to make sense of across 819 different pages. Each of the sections, there are 15 sections, are available individually, and you might find, particularly for your third assignment, you might find that a particular industry report or a particular approach is very useful to you. Each year, she also provides a regulatory section as well, which is particularly interesting. This too is from Webb's 2023 report, and it's basically a heat map showing the impact of a range of trends on industries. So down the side, she's got a range of industries: agriculture, automotive, education, financial services, media, retail, telecommunication, and others. And then across the top on the x-axis, there are headings for different kind of trend clusters: AI, generative AI, climate and green tech, mobility, AR, VR, XR, robots and drones, Web3, bioengineering, metaverse, and quantum computing. Now, the ones we're particularly interested in are clearly the AI group and Web3, anything blockchain related, clearly. And so basically green means it's happening now, right through to purple where the long-term relevance is shining through. Again, this might be a useful thing for you to come back at and and have a think about, particularly when you're doing your third assignment and you're going to focus in on a specific industry. So next set of words that we need to make sure we're on track with: trends. What are we talking about when we talk about trends? As when we use the word in normal language, a trend is a pattern or a tendency. So we're talking about the way that people, organisations or societies behave, think or interact over time. What patterns can we see? These can be influenced by factors including culture, tech or the economy. And let's face it, the tech and the economy, both significant as I speak to you right now. In the context of AI and blockchain, understanding trends can help us anticipate the legal and regulatory implications of the technologies and identify potential areas of concern or opportunity. So when we're talking about trends, we also need to think about both mega trends and weak signals. Weak signals are early indicators or hints of a potential future trend. So these are things that in the future might have significant impact on societies, industries, or technologies, or might just peter out. For AI and blockchain, it makes sense for organizations to try and identify and interpret weak signals because these areas are changing so rapidly. Looking at the weak signals will allow you to make proactive decisions to mitigate risk and capitalize on opportunities. Let's go back to the early days of the internet, the retail internet's development. There are a number of really weak signals that indicated that this technology was going to revolutionize how people communicate, access information, and conduct business. So these signals were things like the growing popularity of personal computers, the development of early networking protocols, and ultimately the establishment of WW2, the World Wide Web, by Tim Berners-Lee in 1989. The creation of these computer clubs where, sure, mostly outliers, but people were really fascinated by the ways in which their lives could change as a consequence of this technology. On the other side of a trend, after the weak signal, is the megatrend. So a megatrend is a large-scale, long-term shift in society, technology, or the environment that has a significant and lasting impact on the world. But let's face it, by the time it's a megatrend, everybody knows about it, and your strategic advantage in noticing it is significantly smaller. Examples of megatrends include things like climate change, urbanisation, and the rise of AI and automation just generally. In the context of AI and blockchain, understanding megatrends can help us anticipate potential legal, ethical, and regulatory challenges that are likely to arise as those technologies continue to develop and become more widely adopted. Let's go back to the retail internet example. It itself, by the time we got to the late 1990s, became a megatrend, and ultimately over the last 20 years has had a transformative impact on society, economy, and technology. The internet has redefined communication, facilitated the globalization of business, and driven the emergence of a range of new industries and job roles. 20 years ago, we didn't have e-commerce, we didn't have digital media, we didn't have really social media in any meaningful way, not as we understand it today. Recognizing this megatrend early could have allowed businesses, governments, and regulators to better prepare for the challenges and opportunities presented by the internet, including issues related to data privacy, cybersecurity, and intellectual property. So much easier to do with hindsight. One of the things that comes up whenever you're talking about futures is something called the Gartner Hype cycle. And the version that I have on the screen at the moment, don't bother worrying about it if you are listening as a podcast, is the latest version, the September 2022 version of Gartner's Hype cycle in relation to fintech. So basically, this hype cycle itself is a graphical representation of the maturity, adoption, and social application of an emerging technology. It illustrates the typical progression of a technology from its initial hype. So it goes up to this peak of inflated expectations, they call it. Then it tends to then go through a period of disillusionment, and ultimately to a plateau of productivity where the technology becomes more widely understood and integrated into society. So for those of you who might have watched the $1 Billion Code show, essentially in some ways what these guys in Germany who had an art and computer science project called TerraVision, they were basically early on the wave. They delivered something right at the hype, but then it just got very difficult to actually move it to the next step, and ultimately somebody else got ahead of them on this wave. Whether or not they did that legally or not, I haven't watched the whole thing yet, so I'm not going to be responsible for any spoiler alerts. So by understanding this Gartner hype cycle, seeing this repeated pattern over and over again, we can better anticipate the stages of development and adoption of AI and blockchain technologies and the corresponding legal and regulatory considerations at this stage. It's really interesting for us to think when it comes to generative AI and things like ChatGTP? Are we at the peak of the hype cycle? Will it come crashing down shortly? Will we end up in the trough of disillusionment? How quickly will we go through the cycle before we end up in some kind of productivity space? Let's go back to my example of the commercial retail internet. We can map this onto the Gartner Hype cycle pretty quickly. In the early 1990s, the internet experienced a period of inflated expectations as investors, businesses, and the public became enamored with the potential. And ultimately, this led to the dot-com bubble, which burst in the early 2000s, leading to a period of, for me, it felt sustained disillusionment. But the internet eventually reached a plateau of productivity as it became an integral part of daily life and business operations. Understanding the stages of this hype cycle could have allowed organisations and regulators to anticipate the changing legal and regulatory landscape and make some informed decisions about their strategies and their policies moving forward. Another way to look at the hype cycle is to look at it. Gartner also produces it as a radar, looking at a range of different emerging technologies. So on the slide, I've got a picture of their latest radar, the 2023 radar for emerging tech and trends impact. Interestingly, the 4 trends that they identify here is neuromorphic computing, self-supervised learning, metaverse, still sticks in there, and then human-centered AI, something that I personally find really, really interesting. So take a look at that when you've got a moment, and think about the ways that this tool or these kind of tools might help you, along with tools you're already familiar with like the SWOT analysis and the PESTLE, and even for the law students, even Iraq, for really digging deep and understanding what the issues and the legal considerations are and how they are likely to change. The last tool that I want to show you is Amy Webb's tool that she uses really as a traffic lighting system. She calls it Adam. And it's a pretty good tool to think about as you're looking at the technologies and thinking about what they are capable of and what they might achieve. Think about, do you need to act now? Do you need to make a decision? Or do you need to watch and wait and monitor? This can be a really great way of proceeding. So in the next video, I want to go a little bit deeper into some of these future trends and scanning methods, which I think will be really helpful to you in your final assignment. Cheers.